For me, the primary purpose of the documentary actually is for policy change, understanding that the root cause of our health crisis is rooted in commercial corruption of medical knowledge, essentially.
Dr. Aseem Malhotra.
Dr. Aseem Malhotra.
Dr. Aseem Malhotra.
One of the most influential cardiologists of our time, Dr. Aseem Malhotra, is on a mission to expose the truth about food, pharma, and the lies that are costing lives.
We expected there to be quite a lot of, at least some mainstream media coverage, and complete media blackout. I think one of the myths out there is people's exaggerated belief in the power of modern medicine.
You've been accused by Big Pharma for many things, including the fact that you have been explicitly providing misleading information to the public.
The COVID vaccine saved tens of millions of lives or hundreds of millions of lives because the results of trials that doctors think is gospel truth is corrupt information. In my view, no one should have been injected with this product. Hospitals have become a branding opportunity for junk food industry because they have ultra-processed food and junk food on their premises. Come back to thinking, what does it mean to be human? Anti-war, pro-freedom of speech, and to have a positive influence on the rest of the world.
Dr. Aseem,
Mary.
Absolutely incredible to have you on the Be That Life podcast. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Your documentary came out quite recently, September of 2024. And, watching it was a true eye-opener, not just for me, but for so many people globally, because you talk about so many important topics that have been kind of like suppressed for such a long time. Why now? Why did you do this?
To be honest, Mary, the documentary First Do No Pharm was really a combination of 10 to 15 years, maybe 20 years of my life experience as a doctor, understanding that the root cause of our health crisis is rooted in commercial corruption of medical knowledge, essentially. So that's really what the documentary was really trying to portray. But I've been in this space kind of exposing this, what is really just a big scandal that has, been, I would say, the main contributor, if not a main contributor to the pandemic of chronic disease over the last few decades. So that's really what the documentary, was about.
How was it received?
Well, it's interesting. So we had a premiere at the Odeon Leicester Square, and which is, the most famous cinema in the world for premieres. We had a lot of celebrity figures that came. We expected there to be quite a lot of, at least some mainstream media coverage. The reason I say that is this was my second documentary. My first one, called The Big Fat Fix, which came out in 2016, that was featured in the New York Times and BBC World News. And this was a much bigger project and complete media blackout. I think partly because, it's interesting. In a way, it's a compliment because there's been despite the fact that I'm a well-known public figure that's constantly being attacked for various things, it was such a solid documentary in my view, in terms of the content and the people in it, that I think it's very difficult to criticize it. So better just to ignore it. But in terms of reception, phenomenal. I mean, for me, the primary purpose of the documentary actually is for policy change. And it's been internationally received. It actually also had a US premiere in the Senate, hosted by Senator Ron Johnson. And these are people that are influencing, obviously, US government. So, and all over the States. But one thing I would say, to put it in perspective, is it is the highest rating on IMDb of any health documentary ever.
Wow,
9.4 out of 10. Yeah. So for me, that's, an objective evidence that it was a decent, we did a decent job with it on a relatively low budget. But something exciting to share, which is new, and most people have not heard this yet, is that we're now in a situation, there's been interest from Hollywood, and we're in discussions and negotiations now to do another documentary, very similar, but to get it into cinemas and release it and get it to film festivals. And the interest from Hollywood is so strong that I won't name these people, but they think that this is potentially Oscar worthy. So that is now the next step in terms of the ongoing campaign.
That's so incredible to hear. And I'm so happy that we're living in a time where all of this knowledge is coming out, where we have been wanting to know the truth for so long. We're on social media all the time and overwhelming amount of information from doctors and specialists. And we've been programmed as a society for the longest time to think that the doctor is the solution to our problems. A good example of that is that my father also passed away from cancer when I was only 22. And he was going for his regular checkups every 6 months. And it wasn't only until stage 4 that they discovered that he had cancer, or that they told him he had cancer, even when he was going to the doctors telling them that he was peeing blood. And not long after that, my son had a neurological disorder. And at the age of 6, he developed motor tics. And when he developed motor tics and I took him to a neurologist, they diagnosed with mild form of Tourette's. And I don't come from a family that had that. So I knew no one in my circle had anything close to having something similar. So for me, already not having faith in conventional medical system, this neurologist prescribing him Prozac at 6, I was like, there's really something wrong. His symptoms increased dramatically for 2 years. And it went from really mild form of these tics to like severe tics. And he was doing even vocal tics. And trying all forms of research online, trying to find ways to help him heal. That isn't a pill for an ill. I turned to traditional Chinese medicine. And I found the power in herbs and remedies and ancient ways of healing that conventional medicine never taught me. And within 2.5 years of him having that severe tics, I completely reversed that. And he just one day didn't have any more tics at all. And it was a combination of healthy diet, prescribing herbs, reducing the stress, focusing on the inflammation, understanding brain health, what are the things from heavy metals and toxicity. And it just was a component of these vitamins that have a really high dose of calcium, magnesium, and zinc. Just went one day from taking those to just completely healing. When I removed that from him, he was doing them again. So I kept him on that for a good 4 or 5 years, and now he's a full-blown adult, 21 years old, with not a symptom of tics. Do you believe that this could happen? That just traditional ways of healing can help someone heal? We can reverse symptoms of disease that were normally prescribed as something that you can heal from based on you need to give someone pharmaceutical drugs to then healing naturally. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, absolutely, 100%. I think it's self-evident. I think one of the myths out there is people's exaggerated belief in the power of modern medicine. If you look at what determines your health, most of it actually is nothing to do with your doctor or to do with the hospital or to do with drugs. It happens outside the hospital grounds. It happens it's all related to the conditions in which people are born, grow, live, work, and age. We call these social determinants of health, or the building blocks of what health is about. And interestingly, what you just said, it reminded me. I actually have a personal story with this myself. So 2017 or so, I woke up one day with this kind of itchy rash. It took a while to get diagnosed, turned out to be psoriasis. And I went to one consultant dermatologist in the hospital I was working at the time. And she said, well, I'm not sure if it's psoriasis, this could be fungal. I want you to go on itraconazole for a few days, which is a very potent antifungal agent. Took itraconazole, completely wrecked my gut. Didn't help the rash. If anything, it got worse. And ultimately, there was not really much option for me other than to take steroid creams, which I did. And it helped a little bit just to relay the symptoms, but the problem wasn't going away. I traveled to India about a year later. The psoriasis is still pretty bad for me. It's quite, irritating to say the least. And I go to India and I meet a friend of mine who is a conventionally trained doctor, but also a functional medicine doctor. Her name's Anjali Huda. One of the most well-known, I think, I would say best top functional medicine doctors of India. And the funny story there is, we had, I think, connected on X, on Twitter then. I had a lot of people, following me there. And, I'd kind of very briefly connected, but kind of forgotten about her because I know so many people. And I was walking one day in Delhi. I was in India. I was there with my parents, and I was walking in one of the markets in Delhi. And I get back, and there's a DM on Twitter from this doctor out of the blue saying, "Did I see someone who was it you or someone that looks like you walking through Delhi market?" And I thought, "Oh my God, it was me. Okay, let's meet for coffee, blah blah." So I went to her clinic. And she was so sort of excited to meet me because my first book, The Piopi Diet, had become an international bestseller and done really well in India. And in fact, I went there and all of her staff in this nutrition functional medicine clinic wanted me to sign the copies of the book. It was so nice. She was so lovely. Anyway, we sat and we chatted. And I mentioned to her, I said, "By the way, I've had this issue with my psoriasis. What do you think?" She goes, "Let's do a blood panel on you." So I did a blood panel. And the one thing she noticed, everything was fine, but she says your vitamin D is in the conventional normal range, but it's actually still a bit low. For functional medicine perspective, it's a bit low. I said, we need to increase it. So I said, okay, fine. So didn't think again. I followed her advice. I said, okay, fine, I'll increase the vitamin D. So I went on high dose of vitamin D for about 6 weeks. I'm not joking. The only thing that changed in my whole lifestyle plan at that point, and I was a year and a half with quite bad psoriasis at that point, was a vitamin D. And Mary, within 6 weeks, it completely cleared. Wow. I sent it to remission. Then it reemerged more recently. We could talk about that later, likely linked to the COVID vaccine. But for 5-6 years, nothing. Unbelievable. So that for me made me realize there's a lot of stuff we don't know in medicine. I mean, this is use of supplements, fine. But when it comes to healing, absolutely. I mean, most of what I do with my patients when it comes to heart disease management, a lot of patients come to me because they want to get off their pills. They want to understand the benefits of the pills better. Like statin drugs, for example, these cholesterol-lowering drugs that are one of the most prescribed drugs in the world. 200 million people to maybe 1 billion people prescribe statins. Most people don't benefit and they don't know it. Right. And, people come to me because they want an informed discussion. They want to get off their pills. And I empower them with a lifestyle plan, which involves diet, moderate exercise, and stress reduction. And there is data, and I see it with my own patients, that you can actually stop the progression of heart disease and even potentially reverse it. This is not with drugs. This is with lifestyle. So 100%. This is where the paradigm shift needs to occur across the world if we are going to save humanity. Because health is declining, mental and physical health is declining everywhere. And that is a road to complete disaster. It's already a disaster, but it could be the road to complete oblivion of the planet, to be honest.
You've been accused by Big Pharma for many things, including the fact that you have been explicitly providing misleading information to the public. So for someone like myself who is already in the health space and consistently trying to do her research and finding information out there that can actually help the global public, what is the one thing that you have seen online that is pretty much the biggest lie today in medical health system?
The COVID vaccine saved tens of millions of lives or hundreds of millions of lives. Or we're talking about a product that, and I had to U-turn on this because as new information became available, my own clinical experience, what we were sold at the beginning, what the world was sold as this vaccine being safe and effective, actually came from drug companies that control the data, and which is well known about. I've been trying to expose this for a long time and get inquiries and stop this happening, because this is why prescribed medications are the third most common cause of cancer, of death after heart disease and cancer globally. Prescribed medications, what your doctor prescribed to you, largely because of avoidable side effects, because the results of trials that doctors think is gospel truth is corrupt information. And most doctors don't even know that, and therefore the public don't know it either. With the vaccine, even though I was somebody that was probably been the most vocal doctor in the world, probably in the mainstream across the world, exposing or highlighting these problems, I completely had a blind spot on vaccines in general, but specifically the COVID vaccine, and of them being harmful. Anyway, to cut a long story short, that original trial that was approved and mandated and led to coercion of this COVID vaccine was reanalyzed by independent scientists, published in the journal Vaccine in the summer of 2022. And what they found, Mary, is from the very beginning, you were more likely to suffer serious harm from the vaccine at a rate of 1 in 800, okay, in the short term. which means hospitalization, disability, or life-changing event, than you were to be hospitalized with COVID.
That's crazy.
Which means no one should have had it. In my view, no one should have been injected with this product. And now we're seeing other harms that are emerging in terms of longer term. So the short-term harms to medium-term harms are heart disease, heart attack, cardiac arrest for the first few years. Then the longer-term harms that are emerging, are multifold. But, immunosuppression from the vaccine, especially boosters, causing cancer, autoimmune conditions. I mean, any and every adverse condition of the human body seems to be getting worse by this COVID vaccine. So it is horrific. It is, in my view, it will go down in history, right? We'll say this now. A lot of people are shocked saying this is it. And I'm somebody that has a track record of being ahead of the curve on many issues, right? Where I was attacked at the time. I was attacked and called a quack when I was the first doctor to publicly really come out and say sugar is bad for health. It's bad for health in terms of cardiovascular health. It's one of the main drivers of the chronic disease problem. And I was called a quack and attacked, and people who are funded by Big Sugar, for example. And now, a few years later, suddenly I'm the lead campaigner behind a sugary drinks tax. So I've been here before. But I can tell you now, with a hand of my heart, I honestly believe that this will go down in history as being one of the greatest crimes against humanity of the century.
Wow. You took the COVID vaccine.
I did.
And I did not. And I chose not to take it because, there were so many people out there who were in the similar situation as myself. It's super hard to trust something that hasn't been around for too long.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate that I lived in a country that did not impose it on people. I didn't have a regular 9-to-5 job, where people at regular 9-to-5 jobs, they had to take the vaccine or they couldn't come to work.
Yeah.
However, massive population who still took the vaccine, and various different kinds of vaccines. Now, are you telling me now that a person that has taken the vaccine will ultimately develop heart failure, disease in a span of 3 to 5, 10 years?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the risk has increased.
Okay, but
I'm hoping it just remains a minority, but at the moment it's already looking like a large minority. Just to give you an example, I mean,
yes.
one article that was published in one of the prestigious journals called BMC Medicine in the US in 2023, if I'm not wrong, basically, and it was later retracted, by the way, not because of error, because the editor got put under pressure. And they did a survey in the United States where 57% of the people who were surveyed, a random selection, felt that they knew someone who was seriously injured or had died, either in their family or friends, from what they felt was a COVID vaccine. And they extrapolated that they felt that this may have been responsible, just within the first year of the rollout, 280,000 deaths in America and 1 million serious adverse events. If you look at that data, and I presented it once in a lecture, that would suggest that we're talking about possibly 1 in 300 people seriously harmed and 1 in 1,000 killed. That, again, is only in the short term, though, short to medium term. So I still think the majority of people will be fine, right? But it wasn't going to protect them anyway against COVID because there was very little benefit. Certainly for people under 70, almost no benefit whatsoever. But they have essentially put themselves potentially at risk. So the honest answer is we don't know.
We don't know.
But my overall clinical intuition and experience is that I think most people will be fine. But, if the statistics were that, 4 out of every 10 planes that crashed, but 6 out of 10 didn't, you'd say, well, most people getting on a plane aren't going to die from a plane crash. Would you get on a plane? No. It's a problem. It's a big problem. It's a lot of people.
I also know that your father passed away. And you have a lot of very strong opinions about how that situation was handled. And you have also quite strong opinions of what you think was the cause. And I think it's an important topic to speak about because there are a lot of people in their family who have taken the COVID vaccine and have lost their parents and have lost family members, or they've seen loved ones within their immediate circle who have been affected by this and don't know how to deal or to understand where this is all coming from. And the fact that your father was extremely healthy, as I know, also a doctor, took the COVID vaccine, and then experienced death in a very tragic way. Please elaborate a little bit on what you think happened there, and could that have been prevented?
Yeah, so my dad was, again, you're absolutely right. He was a very fit and healthy 73-year-old man. You know, he was walking more than 10,000 steps during the whole of lockdown. He was very engaged with people. We'd lost our mother, his wife, obviously, a few years earlier. So that was still we were still grieving to some degree, but he was very resilient and had a huge, important social circle. So he wasn't isolated, and he wasn't, in that sense, he wasn't somebody that would be considered to be lonely, because all these things can actually cause heart problems. Of course they can. And then, he had 2 doses of the Pfizer vaccine in December 2020. One of the reasons I took it wasn't because I felt I was at risk. I was actually also someone in 2020 who was writing articles and publishing on COVID and obesity, and I knew that I was at low risk. And people came to me and asked me whether they should have it. People who were young, under 70, I said, there isn't really any indication here. The only people that should be offered it are over 70s. But I had it partly because my dad was very concerned that I would get COVID and die. He had an exaggerated fear, like many people. But also I felt, because I was a practicing doctor, it may give some protection of me giving it to my patients, for example, or transmitting it. So I felt fine, so ultimately I took it. And then 6 months later, he had an unexpected cardiac arrest. For me, it was very shocking. He had a background of high blood pressure, which was well controlled, but his lifestyle had improved since he'd had heart scans done on him a few years earlier, which had shown some mild to moderate, what we call blockages, suggesting of that. But blood flow was perfect. If anything, it should have remained stable. When he had his post-mortem findings, I thought there would be just a clot that was found that caused a heart attack. There was no actual heart attack. Heart attack specifically is death of the heart muscle because of a complete blockage. There was severe blockages that would have caused a reduction in blood supply and probably triggered an arrhythmia. So the whole circumstance of how he had his cardiac arrest with chest discomfort was also very odd. But at that point, I couldn't explain. Something had happened to accelerate something that was relatively mild a few years earlier to become quite severe in a short space of time. And then in November, I think it was October, November 2021, a publication appeared in the journal Circulation by a cardiologist, a cardiothoracic surgeon actually, called Stephen Gundry, very eminent guy. And you may know Stephen Gundry. I do,
yes.
Yeah, and Stephen, I actually met Stephen. I'll tell you what he told me as well, interestingly, much later on. But he basically found that in his group of patients who were in their mid-50s, within 2 months of having COVID mRNA vaccine, that inflammatory markers that were correlated with risk of heart attack at 5 years went from 11% to 25%.
That's wild.
In 8 weeks after
That's
2
crazy.
mRNA, right? And he showed that the inflammatory markers went up. So one of my main areas of expertise actually is coronary artery disease and its progression. So I know this stuff inside out. I wrote an article in one of the British BMJ journals, which became international news in 2017, saying heart disease is a chronic inflammatory problem, which is exacerbated by insulin resistance. All these metabolic risk factors linked to poor diet that drive insulin resistance. And so for me, the penny dropped at that point. It's like, now there's an explanation, okay? But do I have other data to confirm this? We had real world data coming out in UK and other places saying there was an unexplained increased risk in heart attacks in 2021. We had, and then a whistleblower contacted me from the University of Oxford, basically explaining that a group of researchers there had found through imaging that they were using that there was a signal of inflammation of the heart arteries that was there in the vaccinated but not there in the unvaccinated. Wow. But they didn't want to explore those findings any further because they were concerned it might affect their funding from the drug companies. So for me, there was so many different bits of data here now that I had to speak out about it. And then I ended up writing an article. And I put it through a very rigorous peer review process with the journal I wrote it in. Well, I didn't put it through that. The editor did, of course. And I put this case, and it was accepted that this was possible / plausible of how my dad died through that peer-reviewed journal. So for me, it wasn't, obviously I have a bias because it's my father and I'm emotionally involved in it, of course. But, and then it's been confirmed, it's been confirmed now by so many publications that the COVID vaccine causes cardiac arrest. It can cause inflammation of the heart muscle. It can cause inflammation of the heart arteries. We obviously believe that to be true. it's just not getting enough attention and being widely publicized. And any publicity around it, Mary, is always under this so far. Oh yes, this is rare, but the benefits outweigh the harms anyway. This is unfortunate and rare that people died, very rare in fact, but the benefit, and that is complete nonsense. It's much more common than what's being portrayed in the media, and the benefits were next to useless, like literally next to useless. Just to give you an idea, because people are going to ask this question, in early 2023, the UK government, I think, is the only country in the world that published data. And I think they did this because people within some of those institutions have got a conscience. They may be afraid to speak out, but what they can do is just put tables out and data. And other people can look at it and think, hold on a minute. From 2 doses, if you're over 70, 2 doses of the COVID vaccine, Pfizer, for example, you had to vaccinate 2,500 people over 70 to prevent 1 person being hospitalized.
Wow.
If you get under 50s, you're talking about tens to hundreds of thousands of people. If it wasn't such a serious issue, it would be a joke. It would be laughable.
Wow.
But this is the benefit. And that benefit is, again, from what we call non-randomized data. So it's observational. What that means is it's still not corrected for what we call confounding factors that may put people who are unvaccinated, which we know are unvaccinated in general were higher risk anyway, because they tend to be from low socioeconomic groups. And they had a 2 to 4-fold increase probably of having death from COVID anyway. So that 2,500 figure is probably an exaggerated benefit, which also means there may have been no benefit at all. Now, I don't think that's completely the case, but I think that this all needs to be independently evaluated again, and we'll probably find that, again, from the very beginning, for probably everybody, with the exception of maybe very high-risk groups for short term in preventing from a COVID death, okay, it was going to do more harm than good, significantly more harm than good. And now we're dealing with this fallout.
We're speaking a lot about a certain age group when it comes to COVID vaccines, but then there are a lot of teenagers and even like early 20s who have taken this vaccine. How is that affecting them?
Yeah, I mean, I think the good news is so far the data doesn't seem to show that there is a massive problem with younger people having had the COVID vaccine. Although we do know that teenagers, especially males, did get myocarditis, and that figure could be as high as 1 in 2,700, which is inflammation of the heart muscle. That's not good, because if that leaves scar in the heart muscle, that can be a problem further down the line in terms of a rhythm disturbance and irregular heartbeat, even potentially fatal. So the honest truth is we don't know for sure 100%. I think that youngsters were definitely less likely to have problems. I think one of the concerns now, Mary, though, and I don't have the answer to this, but these concerns have been raised by eminent scientists, is in some way it may be affecting our DNA.
Okay. In what way?
Well, we don't know for sure, but altering it in a way that could cause disease further down the line.
Yeah.
Now, we need to understand this properly with the best medical minds and the best scientists. With all attention, we need to stop. We need a moratorium. We need to stop this now. Around the world, needs to be big headlines. Pause on this vaccine. Let's try and help. Because some people are vaccine injured. They don't know what to do. So we can now find potential cures or treatments, identify who's at risk, reassure people, saying, you know what, actually, no, it hasn't affected the DNA. We looked at this. There was a potential issue. It's an inflammatory issue. We know that. But it hasn't. We need those answers. And until we get an acknowledgement and an apology, there needs to be an apology, right? First of all, there's been a huge mistake here from the medical establishment who have been involved in it. They're not primarily responsible, it's the drug companies. But the medical establishment themselves, who have been unwittingly complicit in the whole coercion rollout, if you like, of this COVID vaccine, need to say, first and foremost, 1, acknowledge the problem. There is a massive problem here. 2, we're sorry. And 3, this is what we're going to do to rectify it or to stop it happening again. This is actually what we learn as doctors about what happens. Errors happen all the time in medicine. Good doctors know how to handle those errors, and patients are very forgiving if they know that you acted from a place of good intent. And I have no doubt that 99.99% of doctors out there are acting from a place of good intent. But we are ultimately the people that had the primary responsibility, right? Not the politicians, not the drug companies. We were the most responsible here, Mary, in ensuring that once the situation arose that there was an issue, we had to stop this, this horror from continuing. And we are also the people who are probably most trusted to resolve it too.
How long have you been a cardiologist?
Well, I've been a qualified doctor since 2001. I decided to, I wanted to be specialize in cardiology probably since I was 11 years old. I had a brother that died of heart failure from a viral illness very suddenly. He was older than me. He was 13, I was 11. That was probably where the initial trigger started. Both my parents were doctors. But in terms of specializing in cardiology, the training specialization for me started probably around 2005, 2006. And then I became a fully fledged, what we call completed my training in cardiology to be a consultant 2012, 2013.
I know that, I have a lot of friends who are doctors or in that space. And can you confirm to me right now that just as a doctor going to medical school, it doesn't matter which specialty you do, how much do you truly learn about nutrition?
Zero. We learn nothing about nutrition, literally nothing, certainly in terms of chronic disease management. And that's another big problem. If you were to ask me, I think there are 3 big limitations in modern medicine right now to deal with the current crisis in health, okay? The first so what are doctors very good at? What we learn to do very well is diagnosing disease, okay? We're not good at root cause. We're told often these things are inevitable, they're genetic defects, we don't really know the cause. You can take a drug, for example. So this is the first thing. So root cause is not something that, especially when it comes to lifestyle. 2, we are not trained, as you said already, in lifestyle interventions to help manage certain conditions and diseases, get people off pills, reduce the need for pills, improve quality of life through lifestyle. And 3, we are not, and this sounds very strange and even crazy for people to hear, we're not trained in actually engaging in true informed consent when it comes to the prescription of drugs.
Wow, that's mind-blowing.
Yeah. So if you came to me, for example, and asked me, Doc, I'm hearing that statins prevent heart attacks, should I be taking it? Most people around the world are prescribed statins who are not high risk of heart disease, they're low risk. At best, the benefit of them over a 5-year, I say at best because this is still from drug industry-sponsored trials that have never been independently verified. The benefit of taking a statin over a 5-year period is 1 in 100.
Wow.
Preventing a non-fatal heart attack and non-disabling stroke without prolonging your life. That's at best, if you don't get side effects. This is not conveyed to patients when they have consultations with doctors. They're basically put into a fear. They've got high cholesterol, or this will reduce this will significantly reduce your risk of having a heart attack.
Right.
So the doctors themselves also don't even understand the data properly, and therefore they can't communicate it to patients. Now, this is in some ways deliberate, okay? Because actually the people who are controlling the narrative and the perception are actually the drug companies, ultimately at the root, whose only motive is to make money. And there's nothing wrong with making money, but they're making money through deception, through fraud, okay? This is their business model.
Let's talk about...
But most doctors don't know this, and most doctors don't even understand that medical journals that they rely as being biblical truth are actually heavily funded by the pharmaceutical industry. So just to give you perspective here, the person I always cite or mention in this space is John Ioannidis, who's professor of medicine at Stanford. I call him the Stephen Hawking-like figure of medicine because he's the most cited medical researcher in the world. And in 2006, he published a paper in one of the journals called PLOS ONE, which was called Why Most Published Research Findings Are False. Why most medical published research findings are false. And one of the risk factors for the false publication is the greater the financial interest in a given field, the less likely the research findings are to be true.
That's crazy. I have many people in my network, people who come to me with help regarding cholesterol. There's so much information out there on what causes cholesterol issues. Is it genetic? Is it just like you get it over lifestyle? Can you heal? Do you need to take statins? What happens if you take statins for 10 years? Can you just quit it? Because doctor says if you quit it, it will just be detrimental to your health. What are your thoughts on this? Please elaborate a little bit more and enlighten my listeners on how do we develop high cholesterol issues? Why are people getting high blood pressure? Why are we prescribed statins? If we're taking statins already, can we stop taking statins and live better, healthier, reduce all of these issues that we're having?
To answer your last question first, Mary, absolutely yes.
Yes.
Obviously, don't do it without speaking to your doctor, but there's a fear amongst people that if they stop their statin, they could die. I've already told the benefits very, very small, so the risk of death is extremely small, certainly in the short term, like even smaller. I published actually in a peer-reviewed journal on this particular question, and we calculated that even people who are high risk, who have had a heart attack, where the benefits are higher, the risk of death, again, I still think this is an exaggerated risk because this is from industry-sponsored trials that haven't been independently verified and in people who didn't get side effects. So if you've got, in my view, and I've written about this in my book, A Statin-Free Life, if you've got genuine side effects from a statin, the risk of death from stopping it is probably zero. Okay? But if the symptoms you're getting is not a side effect and you can only test it out, even then the risk of death is 1 in 10,000 over a 2-week period of stopping it, which is a time that you can often start to see benefits. If it's a statin is the cause of the problem, whether it's muscle aches, brain fog, erectile dysfunction, stomach issues, fatigue, then these are the most common side effects. They will get better within a few weeks of stopping the statin.
And what do you need to do to get better? What's the lifestyle modification that someone needs to do who are currently on statins, listens to this podcast, wants to try?
First of all, let's talk about cholesterol. So
Yes.
raised total cholesterol and LDL, so-called bad cholesterol. I've independently analyzed this with other scientists and published in many different journals and looked at the data in its totality. Okay, not selected information for the benefits of drug industry profits. Okay, and I'm somebody, by the way, that has never had any link to pharmaceutical industry, food industry, supplement industry. I'm completely independent voice in all of this. High cholesterol, and specifically high LDL cholesterol, is not a significant risk factor for heart disease. It probably should be removed.
Wow.
Think about that.
Wow.
Not just that, we found in our research published in the BMJ in 2016 that if you're over 60, the higher your total cholesterol and LDL, the less likely you are to die.
Wow.
Because cholesterol has an important role in the immune system with no increased risk of heart disease. So I personally do not even, people come to me in fear and I'd say reassure them. Now, within the cholesterol profile, there is something called triglycerides and HDL, good cholesterol and triglycerides. They are correlated much more with heart disease progression, but they can be altered quite quickly by diet, which basically means cutting out ultra-processed foods and low-quality carbohydrates. So any food that raises insulin and glucose, that means sugar, ultra-processed food, which is basically a mix of low-quality carbohydrates, starches, sugar, unhealthy oils, additives and preservatives, 5 or more ingredients, comes out of a packet. If you can count 5 or more ingredients, comes out of a packet, it's basically toxic. Avoid it, essentially, to your body, right? If it's being regularly consumed, okay? There is evidence to show that it is. So these are the types of foods that are going to drive insulin resistance, which is the main driver of heart disease. So that's what you need to focus on.
Are hospitals, you think, really incentivized to make people sick?
No, I don't think they're incentivized. I think it's just part of the system. You see, ultra-processed food has become unavoidable, just like cigarettes were at one stage. In the 1970s, half of adults smoked. You have ashtrays on airplanes. I mean, think about it.
That was mind-blowing when you told me about that. I had no idea.
Yeah. So what's happened now is hospitals have become a branding opportunity for junk food industry because they have ultra-processed food and junk food on their premises. That was a tactic, if you like, a deliberate tactic by the food industry. I met somebody very senior in Unilever years ago, and he said one of the, how should I put it, primary goals of Coca-Cola was to make their product available to anyone, anywhere, at any time. Even a bed-bound patient in hospital who couldn't get to the shop of the hospital would have it brought to them on a trolley. And there were contracts between the chief executives that are created between hospitals and these companies to ensure that their products went to the hospital bed. And I saw that in my ward rounds. Crisps, potato chips.
I've seen it too.
Candy. It was like, this is just absolute madness being brought. Now, what it does psychologically, it makes a patient think this is not bad for your health. This is okay. It's about the pills. It's got nothing to do with why I'm here, right? So this is what they've done. We've got a huge cultural shift to make. We've got an indoctrination to overturn, and we've got policies that need to be introduced through the only mechanism we have really is government intervention to pass laws to make sure these, like we did with cigarettes, to make it unacceptable or ban the sale of these foods. Listen, I'm not for banning them from. People can have the occasional treat, right? But they shouldn't be so pervasive that they become unavoidable. And now we know that these sorts of foods are probably addictive, which has a completely different category, like with cigarettes, where addiction is the opposite of free will. It can't be an issue of personal responsibility. If they have deliberately been engineering these products, these fake foods, so that people hyper-consume them, they get addicted to them, they make them sicker, then it absolutely needs to be regulated.
How is the government in the UK currently playing a role on fixing a lot of these issues? I know that you are on the forefront of really creating massive impact and change. On the flip side of that, a lot of people haven't received that very well either, because at the end of the day, the government have a completely different understanding and way on how they want to. I mean, these are years and years of policies that can't just be changed overnight. And are they pro public safety, public health, or are they against it? So how are you really rallying, yourself, the troops? Because I've heard that you are now helping the U.S. government with changing policy and creating impact there, and that's a big deal. And is that the same kind of impact you're looking to do here in the UK?
Yeah, I think what's happened in the UK. I mean, I was a founding member and science director of a group called Action on Sugar, and I'm considered one of the lead campaigners, if not the lead campaigner, that helped bring about a tax on sugary drinks in this country. It needs to go further. I've been lobbying. Matt Hancock, the former health secretary, asked me in 2020 what should we do to combat obesity, because there was clear links between obesity and adverse outcomes from COVID, and huge correlations with poor metabolic health and adverse outcomes from COVID. So he asked me what we should be doing. I said, you need to treat ultra-processed food like the new tobacco. So it just needs constant, tenacious publicity through social media, through these conversations, through mainstream media. This is how you get change to happen. In terms of government, I mean, I know many politicians, both parties. Some of them are my patients. They come to me for medical advice, okay? And most of it is actually just ignorance. They've been taken in by lobbyists, so their version of what the truth is exactly the same version of the truth for most people, which is false. So they need to be educated as well. And it kind of works in synergy. There's actually a concept that emerged out of Thailand called the triangle that moves a mountain. The mountain is considered almost an immovable object. So there are three inputs to help move that mountain. One is create the right knowledge, the truth, disseminate it to the public, so the public participation, and then it also has to go to the politicians who have the control over laws and policies. Mainstream media is an alternative media now, probably the two biggest influencers to influence the public opinion as well as the politicians. That's how you do it. There's a very specific strategy involved.
I'm so happy that you're a part of something that is going to be really creating this massive impact in the world, because, a lot of us really still follow the US for a lot of things, right? It's still the country that we, get information from. They're really progressive. They have a lot of power in the world and the way the world operates. Definitely countries like the Middle East too, and me growing up in a country where we have a lot of things that isn't really spoken about, and I think should. They are, as a government and a leadership, still trying to create impact from a cultural perspective, because as you know, based on different cultures, different eating habits, different sleeping habits, different lifestyle. Tobacco is still, something that people do indoors. In places like the Middle East, it's accepted. And in countries like, like the UK, where it's great that it's refreshing that you can go indoors and they ban that. No vaping, no smoking. And I love that. And somebody who cares about things like secondhand smoking, which, doesn't matter to other people. Like, these are important factors, or even just small changes that governments can do to really create a better world. Now, heart attack is definitely a leading cause of disease, not just in the US, in many parts of the world, right? And you did mention that it is, or research has shown that it is a leading cause of disease specifically in men and very different in women based on, women develop higher risk after menopause.
Correct.
You also mentioned this. And with our current landscape and how things are moving so fast, the herbicides and pesticides in food, organic farming is not considered to be as good as what they claim it is. I had this conversation with Dr. Zach Bush recently on my podcast, and it's challenging when you live in an environment that is very difficult to switch people's mindset. So from your perspective, in a country where, for example, I live in, where we have massive obesity rates in children because sugar is still, one of the number one addiction causing, I've been addicted to sugar at some point in my life. We all have been, right? What can you recommend to a government that is trying to make those kind of changes? And then also from a perspective of just a regular bystander.
Yeah. So, one of the iron laws of public health is that if you're going to make a change to consumption, you have to then focus on the environment and the drivers of the consumption, overconsumption. So with big tobacco, for example, the way that we curbed tobacco consumption, which very quickly reduced heart attack death rates, for example, right, was in public health we call targeting the 3 A's: the availability, the affordability, and the acceptability. So availability basically means, certain places like near schools or hospitals should not be selling sugary drinks or sugary foods, essentially, right? That's one way. You can ban those. The affordability is you raise the price. And as soon as you raise the price of something, automatically consumption goes down. But it has to be backed with a public health education campaign, so these interventions are then acceptable. So education as well has to be part of it. Education alone won't do very much, but they all have to work in sort of synchronicity or synergy. And that's really what a government should be doing, I think, but they need to understand first and foremost the problem and hear it from independent scientists and not be, and also I think be convinced that they know if their population is getting sicker, that isn't good for society, right? An unhealthy population is not a productive population, it's an unhappy population. We know, I'm sure you know very well, that there is also a huge correlation with these poor metabolic health and ultra-processed food consumption and depression and anxiety. There's a very good clinical academic scientist in Stanford who I've worked with called Shibani Sethi, and she came up with she runs, she was a founder of the Metabolic Psychiatry Unit in Stanford, and they've shown through research as well that a ketogenic diet can actually have significant impact on people with severe mental illness and improve their outcomes. So I think there's an evolving space here, but it isn't just about the physical health. But to be honest, if you're not well, if you've got type 2 diabetes or a chronic condition, it's going to affect you adversely mentally as well. If it was like we can just all really be happy eating junk food and die, even if we die a bit earlier, but we're all happy and we don't have, then there's an argument to be made, who cares? But no, that's not the case, unfortunately, because it's not just lives being cut short, it's people living longer now with chronic pain, chronic mental health issues, disability because of these diseases.
Well, food is like one element to, there's pros and cons to the way people eat, right? There is the fact that we eat to nourish, and we also eat to cause disease. And a lot of the times we're eating because we're trying to, or just feed our emotions. And for the most part, why do we have chronic obesity? Why do we have a lot of problems?
Very, very good point. So what is at the root? What is the sort of the root cause that drives, other than the environment and the addiction? It's fueled, you're absolutely right, Mary, by chronic stress, disconnection from each other, disconnection from ourselves, and then we naturally go for the dopamine hit, which is a sugary whatever, the donut or whatever, the burger.
And big drink. Food feeds on that.
And then the cycle, and then it makes us more and more depressed, more and more unhappy. And then we need with any addiction, you need more to get the same level of short-term pleasure, if you like. Right? It's all very short-term. So this creates a cycle. So part of the solution as well to this on a broader scale is actually to come back to thinking, what does it mean to be human? And there's a wealth of research that's been done looking at people who are more materialistic. Listen, we all have materialism to a certain degree, but if that becomes part of the dominant part of your thinking, then those people are more unhappy, more depressed. So that means that people who put more value on image, status, and power and objects than they do on living, loving, and learning, for example, on human beings, right? And that is not what actually it means to be human. And we know, and we're learning the hard way through this current system, this economic system, this culture that has been fueled by, I would say, non-human entities, these big corporations who are psychopathic. Let's be very clear. They're defined now as being psychopathic in the way they conduct their business. This is really the root of the heart of the problem. So this conversation needs to be had to change culture as well. But there is hope in this disaster, in this crisis. I see there is hope. In America, for example, I think a leading voice in this movement in the world, in America, I'm proud to call him my friend, is Robert Kennedy Jr. And he understands it in so much detail and depth because he's gone through his own suffering himself.
Yes,
The trauma of losing his uncle and his father to assassinations, his own addictions, right, in his early adulthood, which he overcome, and he's become a very spiritual person now. I think these are the kind of leaders that we need that are going to help, shape a different world. And one of the things he said that he wants to restore America. Obviously, Americans are very proud, but he wants America to become the moral authority in the world, which they were in the 60s.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Anti-war, pro-freedom of speech, and to have a positive influence on the rest of the world. Because actually, in many ways, what's happening in the Middle East, what's happening in countries like India, South Africa, South America, a lot of these are influenced by what America has.
Exactly.
This is, British colonialism, okay? The British Empire, which ruled a quarter of the world at one stage, right, was replaced in a way by American imperialism in the form of corporate capitalism. But it's actually very much the same thing.
Right.
It's exploitation of people for money, right? That's what's happened. But it's not now cross-border, it's within borders. There is a very small minority elite group of people who themselves are benefiting financially from this system, but I think they don't fully appreciate yet and understand how it's self-destructive. Because ultimately, if the people that they are employing are sick, if the society disintegrates, ultimately, everybody loses. And of course, you can't genuinely be truly happy in your soul if you are benefiting from other people's misery, and specifically, you are the cause of that misery.
You spoke about metabolic health earlier. And it's important for me to just take a step back and talk a little bit about that, because I believe like a lot of people who are developing a lot of disease these days has a lot to do with poor metabolic health. How does somebody develop poor metabolic health? And talk to me how you would help someone heal from that.
So in very basic terms, poor metabolic health is an imbalance between the fat being stored for energy purposes and it being utilized. So essentially, it's linked to excess body fat, which even happens, at people who have so-called normal body mass index. All right.
Okay.
So there are 5. The underlying process is insulin resistance, the body becoming resistant to the hormone insulin over time. And there are 5 markers that are very simple to measure that tell you whether or not you have optimal metabolic health. By the way, just for perspective here, the latest stats show that only 7%, approximately 7% of American adults have optimal metabolic health. I mean, 93% are not metabolically healthy.
Mad.
Okay, so those are waist circumference, triglycerides, HDL, which you mentioned earlier. So that's 3, blood pressure, and your glucose.
Right.
Whether you're type 2 diabetic or pre-diabetic, okay? If all those are in the normal range, you've got optimal metabolic health. I have been managing people for years individually, and of course I've written about it in my books, about how one can rapidly improve metabolic health purely from dietary changes alone. The other things are important for sure, but just to demonstrate that dietary changes alone probably going to have the biggest impact very quickly on your metabolic health. And then because of that, myself and a well-known nutritionist in the UK, very experienced clinical nutritionist with a very strong reputation, we got together and decided that we wanted to create a program so many more people can benefit from this, at an affordable, cost, where we educate them about metabolic health. We give them a diet plan. We give them recipes.
Perfect.
I give we give educational content on things like supplements, on, I talk about cholesterol, on statins, etc., and new emerging, stuff that comes out in the media news, so that people aren't just following a plan. They themselves are almost becoming their own experts in health, which they can then teach others and their family members.
So
that's what we put together. And it's called
incredible mission.
Yeah.
That's exactly what people need to be doing. I believe that the future of the world is that we're our own doctors. We no longer need to rely on a doctor to tell us how we feel. The problem with us today is that because of ultra-processed food, the stress, we no longer have or can listen to our gut intuition. I know many people who feel certain things but kind of brush it off, right? And we develop symptoms that I believe are little angel messengers that tell us if something's wrong, but because we're overburdened, overstressed, can't sleep well, not eating right, we're not listening to our system anymore and our bodies. Yeah. And then we have programs like this that people need to get on, because if they want to change the way that they look at their health, their children's health, just people around them, their parents who are getting older and no one even understand this.
Mary, what's extraordinary, the feedback, what keeps me going with all of this is the feedback from my patients. But even with the Metabolic Reset program, which we've started, we've got testimonials of people who's sending their type 2 diabetes into remission in 4 weeks.
Wow.
It's following the plan.
Yeah,
a lady just contacted me the other day saying, that she was so happy that she was able to lower her blood pressure and a blood pressure pill, come off her blood pressure pills.
Wow.
Just within 4 weeks of following the plan. And she said, I feel great. It's not just about those pills and those conditions. They said, I'm sleeping better. My energy levels are better. I'm feeling better mentally.
Incredible.
So, it's a win-win.
It's totally. And this program is a 6-week program, 8-week program. What's the program
It's online. It's an ongoing program where there's a community, so people can constantly communicate. People can come in and leave whenever they need to leave. I think a lot of people are going to want to stay because there's new content always, and they want to. I think for long-term sustainability, being part of a community also helps. But,
I agree.
But, at the very minimum, people can go on it for 4 weeks.
It's a 4-week, and they can see transformation.
They can see that transformation. And people, it's an online program. And the other thing as well is that myself and Kim, because people like engagement, we have every month we do like an hour Q&A. We can talk about, people can engage with us directly and ask questions. So, it's interactive. And then we have educational content, which we're going to put out as well. So there's quite a lot of stuff going on with different experts coming in, talking about whether it's sugar or stress reduction. So there's quite a lot in there. And it's the website is metabolicreset.co.
Metabolicreset.co.
Yeah, and it's international. So people in America, Middle East, India, Australia, UK, we've got people from all around the world.
I'm sure all of my listeners would go directly on metabolichealth.co sign up.
Metabolicreset.co.
Metabolicreset.co. Because I know that a lot of people are desperate for community. They want to feel like they belong. Yeah. A lot of people don't really understand what people are going through, and they, like the UAE, Dubai, it's a lonely city when you're constantly, all larger cities have that same effect, right?
Yeah.
You're constantly in the hustle mentality, hustle culture, that it's so difficult to be able to connect to people these days, especially with all the dating apps and apps in general. How we connect to people, it's not the same how we used to connect to people back in the day, where we actually valued in-person meetups.
Completely.
Right?
Like, listen, Mary, I was thinking about this the other day, and we're all guilty of this, but I was just like, when I was at university, we didn't have mobile phones. Okay, these are the days. We're obviously a bit older. Old people listen like, what? I didn't have a mobile phone until I became a qualified doctor. I remember being very happy, and people are happy in university, of course. Had a great social life. We had we had these phones, they were not mobile phones. People ring, they leave messages. You get excited to hear a message, you call back. I never ignored a phone call or someone ringing, ever, right? But because our lives are so jam-packed with so many different things we're doing right now, there are times you just don't have time to answer a phone call often. Yeah. I get a phone call even from some friends or whatever. I was like, I can't deal with this now. I'll call them back. Or,
True.
And I understand, I was reading somewhere recently that it was something like a quarter of under 25s, Mary, have never actually had a phone conversation with anybody. Everything is just through text.
I believe that. Crazy, right?
This is just, it's insane.
This is crazy. I really miss connection. I miss how we would, use those scratch cards and call people on a payphone and like not have GPS and we need to meet somebody at a certain hour.
Yeah.
And, when you say like 3 p.m., they're there at 3 p.m. And we had like these physical maps that we would draw out and say people we need to. I believe that although the world is evolving to so many incredible things,
Yeah.
I think the fact that we're losing connection is something that should not evolve in that way.
Yeah.
And I think you and I should continue to advocate for the fact that we need human connection. And AI and technology is amazing, but if you have the chance to call a friend today, call them.
Yeah.
If you haven't spoken to your parents in months, call your parents. And if you haven't maybe even like taken time to connect with yourself, which by the way, most people don't take time to connect with themselves, and that's the reason why they develop disease, is because they're not having any self-care.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think all this is detrimental to us mentally. So,
Right.
We've progressed, technologically, we've progressed amazingly in the last
We
100
have.
years, even thousands of years. But in the last 2,500 years, since the time of the Buddha, Socrates, Confucius, we have not progressed psychologically. In fact, I think we are now regressing psychologically. And why that's important is that you cannot optimize your physical health without optimizing your mental health.
Right.
And you can't optimize your mental health without optimizing your physical health. They go hand in hand.
They
They're
do.
not separate.
And the wonderful thing about meeting you whenever we do meet up is we always meet with a hug. Why aren't people hugging more?
Oh, I know. We need, you
Right?
know what? Instead of mandating a COVID vaccine, they should have mandated hugging.
Totally.
Actually.
And
that's the next stage, I think.
And I think hugging should really be the new form of connection in terms of like that's instead of a handshake,
Yeah.
instead of kiss on the cheek, you just hug
Yeah,
people.
100%.
Let's make that the norm.
I think
Let's
we should.
normalize
Let's
that.
do that.
Last question for you before we end this super insightful podcast is I like to ask my guests what Be That Life means to them. Because for me, Be That Life, because my brand is called Be That Life, my podcast is called Be That Life. When I started the journey to better health and then helping create an impact, I always wanted a different life. I wanted a life that was free from disease. I wanted to get out of my current situation. I wanted to be the best mother, have the best impact. Be That Life for me is being able to look at my life today and know that I've done it all. I've done everything that I was in my power to do to create the life that I wanted. What does Be That Life mean to you?
I think for me is, to ultimately, I think, is to have a life that has a positive impact on other people around you. So, in its broadest sense, is to leave this world in a better place than when you found it.
I think that's so beautiful because not everyone in this world is lucky enough to find their purpose before they pass away and leave us. And I know specifically because I have so many friends in this network of doctors who work in, cancer care and the one thing that every single person in their deathbed always wish they would have done more. And you and I were so blessed that we're in a position that we have found what our calling and what we want to do. And, I would like to welcome everyone to take a moment and just find what you're passionate about, because passion leads to purpose.
Yeah.
And most of the time, people are too afraid to live their passion. And that's the only way that you're going to have a super fulfilling life is to let go of the fear of not fitting in, of low self-worth, a low self-esteem. Let go of your comfort zone, of the most familiar thing in your life, and go towards the unknown, because that is where you really create massive transformation, not just for others, but you radiate confidence. You radiate happiness and joy. When you find your passion, you will find your purpose. Thank you so much, Dr. Aseem. It was such a pleasure to speak to you.
Thanks, Mary.